Very thankful for him being here, and I'll turn it over to Brother Payne now.
Well, just so you know, my wife forces me to count my in-laws. So if I count my in-laws, all my son-in-laws, and my grandson-in-laws, there's 81. So just so if you need to know that. It's too many. Can't get around them all. But that's the way it is. Appreciate very much being able to be with you tonight. I am honored to be invited to be a part of your study, and it's good to come over. And like you say, we see each other. I mean, if there's any good thing that came out of COVID, it's the fact that you can go online now and watch just about anybody's church service. So you can hear preaching if you want to, all over the world, but locally too. So I've spied on Benjamin quite a bit, and I appreciate being able to be a part of it, because Habakkuk is an amazing prayer, quite different. I don't know if there's anybody else like that in the Bible. Not too many other prayers like the prayer that Habakkuk offers. Back in 1970, right in there somewhere, there was a TV series. It was based on a field hospital, Army field hospital in Korea, which, if you have never seen it, it seemed like a very strange setting for a comedy show. But if y'all remember MASH, it probably still on reruns, I don't know. But on MASH, one of the best known characters on there, his name was Klinger. Now, the Hebrew word for Klinger is Habakkuk. Now, I grew up in West Texas. I've known this guy all my life as Habakkuk. So that's who he's going to be to me. That's probably not exactly the way educated people pronounce it, but you know who I'm talking about, right? And so when you think about somebody that's clingy, you kind of think that's a negative thing, right? But all of you parents know that your children go through a phase, right, when they're very clingy. They don't want you to go out of the room. They want you to hold them all the time. It's not a bad thing then, is it? And there's one other phase they go through that we'll talk about in a minute, and that's when they say, wah, wah, about 5 million times a day. Now, Brenda and I fostered for several years, and when you foster, you're forced to go to parenting school. So I've been to parenting school. Do y'all have a parenting license? I do. Whatever good that does. The people that taught the school didn't have any children, so just so you know. But one of the things that they did say was that the way to handle that, the magic phrase that will shut up any kid from asking you why, is to ask them, say, you tell me why. Now, we just finished our vacation Bible school at Waxahachie, and I was tasked with telling one of the parables, powerful parables was, I think, and I was tasked with telling the story of the Good Samaritan. So all the kids were sitting there, and the most toughest critics I had were 2 4-year-olds sitting there, and the questions that they had were tough, man. But anyway, the idea of being clinging, that word, the strong word, is actually in the Bible a lot of other places, and I guess you probably know that Deuteronomy chapter 10 at verse 20, we're to cling to the Lord in the New American Standard Version, hold fast in the King James, but clinging to the Lord, that's what Habakkuk, I guess, was doing. If his name is particularly relevant to his message, then that's what he was doing. In Genesis 2 verse 24, that cleave to your wife verse, that word in newer versions, New Revised Standard Version, has what they're cling in there. That's the word. That's Habakkuk. And so all we know about Habakkuk, as far as the context is going on this, is that he calls himself a prophet twice in his book. And so prophets at that time, it doesn't say the same thing that it talks about Jeremiah and some of the other prophets who were called by God and they were reluctant and tried to weasel out of it, but they forced them to go. Habakkuk comes to God. As far as we know, the first thing we get is our introduction to him is this prayer, when he calls upon God. And so now he may have been trained in in a prophet school back in Samuel's time, and Saul, and then later Elijah. There's a lot of mentions about prophet schools where they were, I guess, educated in the law of Moses and so forth. But he was either that, or some people say because in Habakkuk 3:19, he gives this little direction for his song, for the choir director on my string instruments, that maybe he was a priest, but may have involved in the temple worship. That's about all you know about prophet himself. Not a lot of info in there other than his inquiry into what's going on. And so you have this, to me, it's a remarkable dialogue between the prophet and God, and he comes to praise. He's frustrated. He argues almost with God. I mean, I talk about this why thing about kids, but we're not that different, are we? I mean, I can identify with the prophet Habakkuk, and I'm sure you can too. And so, as far as the timeline and when Habakkuk lived and died, I mean, Jonah prophesied about Nineveh, and I don't want to get too much into dates, but they say that's around 700 BC, somewhere in there. But then the Babylonians joined forces with the Medes and several others, and they break free and conquer the Assyrians, and consequently Habakkuk then is somewhere after the destruction of Nineveh, but he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, so it was before that, so he's right in there. He's a contemporary with Jeremiah and Zephaniah, and if you count Huldah the prophetess, who prophesied to Josiah. So he's a pre-captivity prophet. And so what he's talking about is this, what's about to happen, the warning that God has been giving to the Israelites through a series of prophets. And so let's take a minute and read just a little bit. I like reading the scripture. I actually prefer it to preaching, because when I'm reading the word, then every single word is meaningful. You get my drift. And so the burden that the prophet Habakkuk received in a vision, that burden, message in the newer versions, but the word, strong word, means to carry something away. So, the answer to Habakkuk's prayer turns out to be not good news, does it? And so, like Daniel having to interpret the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, or Jeremiah's message about the fall of Jerusalem, he's got bad news. Now, when's the last time you had to break bad news to somebody? I recently preached a funeral for a person that was not a Christian. What do? What do you say? Well, Habakkuk, he argues. He doesn't know how to handle it. So, as we read, he says, opens the dialogue with, "How long, O Lord, must I call for help and you do not listen? Violence is everywhere. I cry, but you do not come to save. Must I forever see these evil deeds? Why must I watch all this misery? Wherever I look, I see destruction and violence. I'm surrounded by people who love to argue and fight. The law has become paralyzed, and there's no justice in the courts, and the wicked are far outnumber the righteous, so that justice has become perverted." You ever feel like you're outnumbered? I mean, you think about we're bombarded with all this LGBTQ plus stuff, but I read a survey that said that's 3% of the population. But you feel like there's more, don't you? Because everywhere you look, you're hearing something about it. Well, Elijah had that feeling. A lot of people had that feeling. And here, this is the way that Habakkuk feels. So the Lord replies. Now, I don't know if Habakkuk knew there was going to be a reply, but he gets one. "Look around the nations. Look and be amazed. For I'm going to do something in your own day, something that you won't believe, even if somebody told you about it." Now, an important thing to me to remember about this is that God's not answering his prayer with this. What Habakkuk didn't realize was that God's been doing this all along. what he's building up to the punishment of Jerusalem has been in the process for decades, centuries really. And so God's already been moving on this. It's just Habakkuk didn't know yet, see. I'm going to do something in your day that's something you won't believe in even if somebody told you about it. I'm raising up the Babylonians, a cruel and violent people, and they will march across the world and conquer other lands. They're notorious for their cruelty and do whatever they like. Forget the Geneva Convention, 1949, and 143 articles of how to treat POWs. Not with these guys. Their horses are swifter than cheetahs, fiercer than the wolves at dusk. Their charioteers charge from far away. Like eagles, they swoop down to devour their prey. They come, all bent on violence. Their hordes advance like the desert wind, sweeping captives ahead of them like sand. They scoff at kings and princes and scorn at their fortresses. They simply pile up ramps of earth and against their walls and capture them. And they sweep past like the wind and are gone. Wait, you read this and you know, you feel the surprise. Habakkuk, have you ever, it would be nice to have a answer, but he doesn't like his answer. O Lord, my God, my Holy One, you who are eternal, surely you do not plan to wipe us out. O Lord, our rock, are you sending these Babylonians to correct us, to punish us for our many sins? But your eyes are too pure to look upon evil. Will you wink at their treachery? Should you be silent while the wicked swallow up a people more righteous than they? Are we only fish to be caught and killed? Are we only sea creatures that have no leader? Must we be strung up on their hooks and caught in their nets while they rejoice and celebrate? Then they will worship their nets and burn incense in front of them. These nets are their gods and who have made us rich, they claim. Will you let them get away with this forever? Will they succeed forever in their heartless conquest? I climb up in my watchtower and stand on my guard post. Then I will wait and see what the Lord says and how he will answer my complaint. And the Lord said, write my answer plainly on tablets, so that the runner may carry the correct message to others. This vision is for the future time. It describes the end. It will be fulfilled. If it seems slow in coming, wait patiently, for it surely will take place. It will not be delayed. Look at the proud. They trust in themselves and their lives are crooked, but the just shall live by their faithfulness to God. King James Version, the just shall live by faith. What does that mean? All right. How long, he says. He's trying to demand some attention. We've all gone through that phase in our lives. Daddy, how long until we get there? Are we there yet? That kind of stuff, right? And here he is. And a lot of people ask that question. Somewhere in the Bible, somebody asked how long 53 times. And somebody asked why 261 times. And sometimes it's God that's asking why. So that's the thing to figure out. Is the way my mind works. When he says this, is he criticizing God when he says that? We all know about intercessory prayer. We pray for someone else, pray for somebody to be well. We pray for thankful for our food, first one thing and another. But that's not what kind of prayer this is. This prayer is, he's interrogating God in a prayer, isn't he? He's trying to get an answer out of him one that he likes. But do you ever do that? Have you ever prayed to God like that? Should you pray like that? Should you expect an answer from God? Waxahachie is a Assembly of God center. The Waxahachie Assembly of God University is there, Wagoo. And so there's lots of people there. And there's a lot of people there that talk to God every day. They'll talk to you about it, But I'm from the school that, like a cartoon I saw on the internet the other day, there was a guy standing looking up into the clouds and he's saying, Why won't you speak to me, Lord? And in the next frame, there's a hand reaching down through the clouds with a Bible. Speak to me, Lord. All right, here it is. Read it. That's where I come from. I don't expect God to answer my prayer directly, but He does for Habakkuk. And so, when you pray, are there been times in your life when you complained about things that God does? Are there times when you really, or maybe you don't think you're praying, but you're complaining about something like the weather? Who complained about the weather? You know, God told Job He's in charge of that. You know, I'm the one that tells the snow when to fall. I'm the one that tells the rain when to rain and make it a flood. So, are you complaining about the way God's running the world? Well, that's what Habakkuk does. Now, the interesting thing about that is that God doesn't condemn him for that. He doesn't condemn him for what he has to say. He answers it. And so, you think about for a minute the things that are going on, that he's being exposed to. He says, I'm tired of looking at the evil. And he describes a little bit about it. I see destruction and violence. I'm surrounded by people who love to argue and fight. The law's been paralyzed. There's no justice in the courts. The wicked far outnumber the righteous, and justice has become perverted. You could say that about the United States of America in the 21st century, couldn't you? And every prophet leading up to the overthrow say something the same way. I mean, Jeremiah in chapter 6, in several places in Jeremiah he does this, but in Jeremiah 6 at verse 6, this city must be punished. It's filled with oppression. As well pours out water, so as she pours out her wickedness. Violence and destruction resound in her. Her sickness and wounds are ever before me. Ezekiel chapter 22 at verse 29, the people of the land practice extortion and commit robbery. They oppress the poor and needy and mistreat the foreigner and deny them justice. And Isaiah and Micah, Zephaniah, Amos, they all describe what's going on in Jerusalem, and it's a lawless place. And the thing is, I mean, if you think about God nuking somebody, my mind always goes to Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Sodom and Gomorrah. And he destroys Sodom and Gomorrah for their perversion. He destroys Canaan for their, the things that are going on there, their idolatry and so forth. But he's planning on destroying Jerusalem for stuff that goes on pretty routinely in the United States almost every day. Every time you turn on the news, you get some story that's about like this, right? Bloodshed, lawlessness, a court ruling that you don't agree with, stuff like that. And so he says, I don't want to see this stuff. And I don't know about you, there's some stuff that I'd like to unsee. The last gay pride parade, there was a time when there were some hysterical women demonstrating in Washington with vagina hats on. I'd like to unsee that. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have some favorite celebrity that I like until they open their mouth and start spewing out their political views, and then from then on, I can't stand to watch their movie anymore. I don't know if you're like that, but you think about things that he says, I don't want to look at that. How long do you ever do that? And here's the thing. He's just being honest. When you pray, are you being honest? Or are you saying what you think you're supposed to say in a prayer? Or do you really just spill your guts out to the Lord? And one thing that you can learn from this story is that you can say it. You can say it. God made you. He knows who you are. He knows what your heart is. He knows what you're going through. There's no reason why you can't say anything that comes into your mind to the Lord. And this how long question is asked over and over. Now, we don't live in a time where we're particularly facing hardship. not like some of the other brethren around the world or these brethren that lived in the Bible. But Psalms is full of that. Oh God, Psalm 74:10, oh God, how long shall the adversity reproach? Psalm 79:5, how long, O Lord, will you be angry forever? Psalms 80 verse 4, O God of hosts, how long wilt thou be angry against the prayer of thy people? And on and on. They ask that question of God, how long is it going to be? And you know, Jesus asked that question too in Matthew 17. I hope he doesn't ask it about me when he says, how long will I have to put up with you? How long must I have to suffer you? Well, if you're being honest with yourself, are you like Habakkuk? Can you identify with him? And so he makes his presentation. Man, things aren't right here at home. And you ought to be doing something about it, Lord. The interesting thing is, at first, I was reading one guy, he says, Habakkuk's first complaint was that God wasn't doing enough. Habakkuk's second complaint is that God was doing too much. So that's exactly what he says. Wait a minute. You are of purer eyes than to behold evil and cannot look on wickedness. Now, when God talks about raising up the Babylonians, you've probably read some of the kinds of things that those people in that time did. They were famous for impaling people. There's several descriptions in Scripture about the kinds of things that marauding armies did when they, in 2 Kings 8, verse 12, they killed their young men with a sword. They dashed their little children with the ground. They assault all the women and rip open the pregnant women. Over and over again, you got those same things being said. Infants dashed to pieces, women being violated, all this stuff. And, you'd think that was something that was relegated to ancient history. But just the other day, we saw some savagery like that, right? In that attack on October 7th in Israel. I mean, we can see what that looks like. And so he makes a statement. And I ask you, is what he says true when, this isn't God talking. This is something Habakkuk says when he says, you are of purer eyes than to behold evil and cannot look on wickedness. Is that true? You stop and think about it. Whenever Proverbs 17:15 says, condemning the innocent or acquitting the guilty, God detests both, right? Letting the wicked go unpunished, that's not something God does. He doesn't do that. And you think about the fact that what does mercy mean if there's not any justice? When Jesus died to justify us so that God could extend us mercy, He's saving us from the wrath of the Lord, right? And so God does. What his eyes behold, Habakkuk calls it evil. God's calling it justice. What he's about to do to those people. But men don't always look at it that way. Just like Abraham in Genesis 18:23, wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? Well, yeah. But we all understand, if you stop and think about it now, when God says, my thoughts are higher than your thoughts, that means he's way above your ability to think. What seems right to you or indefensible to you, on a level that God is thinking, somewhere up there, he justifies that on a higher plane than we're able to grasp. And so he's punishing the wicked with this. And why should he punish the wicked? Why should he do what he's fixing to do to Jerusalem? How else are you going to get it to stop? Huh? He sends all his a long series of prophets and tries every kind of an approach. You have one crying over here, one screaming over here. You got one guy that says, you guys over there, I'm not like you. But none of those approaches change anything. So is he just going to let it continue? And I think the answer is no. I'm raising up the Babylonians, a cruel and violent people that will march across the world and conquer other lands. Now they conquer everything. I mean, the Bible talks about the different countries whenever Jeremiah curses all of these lands, Egypt, Philistia, Moab, Ammon, Edom, Damascus, they sweep all that stuff up. But caught in that same net is Jerusalem. And so what Habakkuk doesn't have any way to know, and sometimes we don't either, is that Nebuchadnezzar, with all of his cruelty, he's doing exactly what God called him to do. You've read these passages before, like Jeremiah 43 at verse 10, when the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, says, "Behold, I send and take Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and I will set him throne above all of the stones that I have hidden." Ezekiel 29, "Son of man, thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will give the land of Egypt to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He shall carry off its wealth and despoil it and plunder it, and it shall be the wages for his army. I've given him the land of Egypt as his payment for which he labored, because he worked for me." He's working for me. He's going to be working for me whenever he sacks Jerusalem too, and carries all of you guys off into captivity. That's the God of the Old Testament. That's the God of the New Testament. He does not abide evil. And he uses kings for a lot of things. Later he's going to call Cyrus his shepherd, because he tasked him with rebuilding the temple at the end of the Babylonian captivity. But he's already got all this stuff in motion by the time Habakkuk gets around to thinking, man, things are bad. I need to pray right quick. God's already been dealing with this for a long time. And if you think about today, I don't know how much of what's going on in the world you attribute to God and providence. If you turn on the news, read the newspaper to find out what God's doing today. I don't know if you look at it like that or not, but, because there's a whole theology about that called providential interpretation. It's kind of a dangerous thing. I mean, Jesus expected his disciples to discern the signs of the times. But he's talking about fulfillment of prophecy. That things that were coming about that had been prophetically predicted. But can we do that today? I think that's a dangerous thing to try to think about. There's a theory that I find kind of interesting from he was a monk in the 16th century, and he came up with an idea about the omniscience of God, what it meant to be all-knowing. And among the other things that he thought about was that God in his all-knowingness was able to conceive every possible scenario that could ever present itself to anybody. Every possible scenario. We pay people in Washington to think about possible war scenarios and stuff like that. Donald Rumsfeld, he talked about the things that you know, and the things that you know, you don't know, but there's always the thing that you don't know that you don't know. That's the one that always gets you in trouble. Well, God is not like that. There's no thing that God doesn't know, he doesn't know. He's able to predict all of those things. The other thing, according to Molinism, I think is what it's called, is that God can he also knows every possible response that any human will have to any given situation. And that in his omniscience, that's the way you say it, he designs scenarios that are the most conducive for any human to make the correct choice. Now, is that true or not? But I like that. I like to think of it that way. 1 Corinthians 10 verse 13, they had no temptation taking you, but such as man can bear. How's he able to do that? He's planning ahead. But obviously, there are things that are God's will but he makes it where it's possible for us to make the right choice. He presents us with the most best. He's been there ahead of you now and created the best scenario for you to choose correctly. But you and I both know that you didn't always do that. So not everything that happens is God's will, right? So he's got to do some things about that, right? And so he's fixing to do that. And so if you try to imagine this, I was just thinking this through, my poor warped mind. I thought, if I tried to imagine, put myself in Habakkuk's position, and if the message was that I'm raising up ISIS and cruel and violent people, and they're going to march across America. Now, y'all remember ISIS drowning those guys in those cages, cutting their heads off, setting them on fire, throwing them guys off them 7-story buildings just for the fun of it, being just bloodthirsty. If I knew they were fixing to come here, then I would feel like what Habakkuk feels like when God says that these guys that are famous for skinning their captives and impaling them on a pole and killing all these civilians, and I would be very upset. And he is. And so the thing is, between now and the end of the book, somewhere along there, Habakkuk starts agreeing with God. And one of the things that he says, the most stark thing that he says to me is that would offer any hope to Habakkuk is, the just shall live by faith. Now, what does that mean? Paul quotes it in Romans 1 and again in Galatians 3. The Hebrew writer writes it in Hebrews 10. What does it mean, the just shall live by faith? What does it mean to Habakkuk? How did that play itself out literally in the coming events? Daniel, Ezekiel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Ezra, Nehemiah. What was life like for them in the captivity? Now, they were all godly men. Now, they still had to go into captivity with all the rest of the sinners, but see what happened to them? The just shall live by faith. In Habakkuk's time, that literally meant that they would survive the slaughter. What does it mean in the New Testament? Well, it has to mean a spiritual application, right? And the thing, what are we going to survive? The just shall live by faith. We're going to survive the end time destruction, right? Now, that's just, what else could it be? One more thing. Well, two more things. One more thing I want to talk about. When they're at the end of the chapter, and he says that no matter what, I'm going to rejoice, though the pens be empty, the no grapes, all that. I reworded that to put it like, just not too long ago, I was going to Walmart and all the shelves were empty. And so that's the way I worded it. Even though the grocery store shelves are empty and there is no more toilet paper or milk, even though the gas prices skyrocket and I can't pay my rent, and even though the credit cards are all maxed out, I'm going to rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. Now, at the end now, see, he didn't like the answer. And he argues with God about it. At the end, he's rejoicing. Now let me ask you a question. What changed? Did God change his mind and say, oh, okay, we'll put it off for a while? He kind of does that every once in a while, but he doesn't do it here. What changed? Huh? Yeah, you remember how Jesus starts out praying if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. But not my will, but thine be done. And then it comes back again, may your will be done. God didn't change. In all this dialogue, God doesn't change his plans. He doesn't change his mind. Somebody did, though. It was Habakkuk. Job was the same way. You remember how Job went through many of you labored through all them 38 chapters until God finally answers him. It's tedious. Read that. And after demanding that audience with God through all those chapters, finally God gives him an answer. He appears to him. And says absolutely nothing about why Job is going through what he's going through. But at the end, Job agrees with God and repents. And so, you and me, it's okay. It's okay to pour out your heart to the Lord. You say anything, because he already knows it anyway. He's well saved. You can complain. You can, question why. Lots of people in the Bible do. Why? Why you do this? Why hast thou forsaken me? Jesus says on the cross. And maybe you felt like that sometime. I've never really had a hard time in life. I've, been given a very blessed life. Too good, probably. But there are people that have been desperate. And maybe you felt like God abandoned you. But, see, just like Habakkuk, just like Elijah, when he said, I'm the only one left. All these guys, God's got it all going, all along. He's thinking way above your head. And just like what he says here, maybe you've tried to do this. When he says, you wouldn't believe it if I told you. Have you answered anybody's question like that before? Maybe some kid, you wouldn't believe it if I told you. In fostering, kids that have been through the system, man, they've got a pretty good grasp about reality. And they tell you, just tell them the truth, no matter what it is. No matter what your mother broke all 7 of your bones, or your daddy did this, or whatever it is, just tell them. It'll either go over their head or they'll soak some of it in, but just say it. Go ahead and say the truth. Well, you can tell God anything. But he may not be able to make you understand what or why he's doing what he is. Just like you like me trying to explain to that 4-year-old the other day at Vacation Bible School. There's a whole bunch of stuff he didn't know. So I just kept talking. But you have to understand that God's working. And what happened to Habakkuk in his prayer was that he changed his mind about the situation. And he is, that chapter 3 is a very positive situation that he's in. Very different from the frustration at chapter 1 and 2. He has come to a point where he's rejoicing and joyful in the God of my salvation. I don't know how else you think about what's going on in the world. There was a time when I used to wish I was president of the United States. I don't know if you know or even like the guy that used on the radio called Rush Limbaugh. And for a little while he had a TV show on Sunday night. It was a comedy thing. And there was a scene they did where he's sitting in the Oval Office and he's president of the United States. Phone rings and he answers it and it says something about gas prices. So he goes over and there's these big levers and this gauge on and he grabs this lever and he starts pulling it and the gas price starts coming down. See, and obviously that ain't the way it is. I don't want to be president. I don't have any solutions for anything anymore. But God is God. He's got it under control. And the thing is, sometimes that's the only way that you can get rid of stuff like ISIS, stuff that's going on in this world. He's calling them to repentance. But then the time's going to come when he's going to give up on it, right? And he's going to put a stop to it. That's what he's telling Habakkuk. And Habakkuk comes to terms with that and is joyful. God didn't change his mind. And you know the history that Jerusalem, Nebuchadnezzar did conquer Jerusalem. He did carry them off into captivity. You also know that those men who were righteous survived. And living in the king's court, it probably wasn't all that bad. I don't know. They were living a pretty comfortable life in captivity. And I don't know if Daniel made it back. There's a Daniel in the list in Nehemiah. I like to think that it was him, but he prayed for the end of the captivity. Maybe his prayer came true, and maybe he lived long enough to go home. But the just live by faith. That's what it meant. Didn't mean that the wicked would live. It meant that the righteous would live. Any other comments about Habakkuk's prayer? Yes, sir.
Just thinking about the more he heard from God, the more that helped him change his mind. And he's hearing from God, and that's something for us. The more we hear from the Lord, the more that'll help us to understand his ways, his will.
Absolutely. It's just the more you know, it's important. Yes, sir.
The end of Hebrews 10 talks about this as well. Starting in 32, recall the former days after you were enlightened, you endured hard struggle and suffering. Then it goes down, for you had compassion on those in prison. You joyfully accepted the plundering of your property, since you knew that you yourselves had a better possession and an abiding one. And then he quotes from Habakkuk, yet a little while, and the coming one will come and will not delay, but my righteous one shall live by faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but those who have faith and preserve their souls. That's the key.
That's an interesting situation that Jeremiah found himself in when y'all remember that he was telling everybody, you got to surrender to Nebuchadnezzar. If you'll surrender to Nebuchadnezzar, then you'll live. And everything will be fine. You're going to go into captivity, but then you'll get to come back. But what kind of message was that? You got to give up. Surrender to God's will, and then you'd survive. They didn't do that, but that was the message. Anyone else? I appreciate so much your opportunity I've had to talk to you, and I hope the rest of your series goes good. Prayer is so important for us to study.
Thank you very much, Brother Payne.